Hi, I'm going to be reading the final chapter in The Clue in the Crumbling Wall, which is chapter 25, and it is titled Heath Castle Restored. The dramatic scene in the tower of Heath Castle ended abruptly. The policemen and their prisoners went one way. Nancy, Lieutenant Masters, and Floriana headed for the Fenimore cottage. When they reached her sister's home, Floriana asked Nancy to go in first and break the news, telling briefly of her present condition and of what had transpired during the past few hours. "Oh, you found my sister," Mrs. Fenimore cried after Nancy had spoken to her. "You wonderful girl! I don't care if we never have Heath Castle. To think Flossie is alive and we can be together again." It was very dramatic. Gently, Nancy warned her about Floriana's another word issue, disabledness. Warned her. Interesting. Okay. The news was a shock, but Mrs. Fenimore took it bravely and hurried outside to greet her sister and help her into the house. Over and over, the joyful women expressed their gratitude to the Drew girl. Nancy said she was glad to have accomplished what she had, but could not be satisfied with leaving the case at this point. For days afterward, the girl was tormented by all the distressing angles of the affair. In the meantime, Floriana had requested that all legal matters be attended to by Mr. Drew. The lawyer had lost no time in having Keep and the other men prosecuted, but his report to Nancy after an investigation was discouraging. Cobb and Biggs admit having found several bottles of valuable dye hidden in the cloister walls as you suspected, but they sold them and kept the money. Since then, they've spent it. Nancy had been hopeful that Keep's dire prediction regarding the estate money would not be borne out, but such was not the case. Mr. Drew had discovered that the total Heath assets were $20 in a ruined castle with a few pieces of furniture. Account books showed huge sums had been paid to various detective agencies, supposedly for the purpose of conducting a search for the missing Floriana. This was not true. The wily lawyer had stolen the money instead. "Unfortunately, we can't recover it," Mr. Drew remarked to his daughter. "It's all spent, and Keep has a little of his own." "How about the Heath pearl, Dad? You didn't find it?" "No. I'll keep on trying, of course. Frankly, I don't feel hopeful about the prospect." "The cloister walls may still contain a few treasures," the girl suggested, unwilling to admit total defeat. "I've had the place searched, Nancy. Workmen even removed the Cinderella block of cement below the wall fountain, and there was nothing behind it. Everything's gone." "Then what's to be done?" Nancy asked unhappily. "Heath Castle will have to be sold for what it will bring, but I'm afraid that won't be much considering its location and present condition. Floriana wants to keep the property, but she can't. She has barely enough funds to operate Clover Farm." It was some consolation to Nancy that she had brought the sisters together, but she felt as if she had failed in one of the most vital tasks of her life. "What if I did solve the mystery of the Heath Castle?" she sighed. "I wasn't able to save the estate or help the Fenimores financially, and they need help so badly." Nancy pondered the problem, but it was not until the next day that an idea came to her. And now I lost my spot. "I'll do it at once," she declared. "Why didn't I think of it before?" Dancing from the house, well, she should be dancing. Dashing from the house, she got out her roadster and headed it for Me Hardy's yacht home. The old man had barely greeted her when she excitedly propounded her scheme. Me Hardy shook his head. "Your idea's good, me lass," he agreed. "The only trouble is there's nary a whelp with the dye in it left in that cove near the factory. The one that stained your friend's dress must have been the last one alive." "Then you've investigated the inlet since we were there?" Nancy asked. Me Hardy nodded. "How about the beach at Heath Castle? Did you find anything there?" "I never really looked," replied the old sailor, his face lighting up with hope. "Got a few clams that day I was there, and then the trouble started. I never went back." Then let's go there right away and look. This time the girls rented a fast motorboat. The girls are back at it. This time the girl, okay, so it's not the girls. The girl rented a fast motorboat at Campbell's Landing, and in a short while, me Hardy was untying his little rowboat from it, and the two eager passengers were skimming across the water to the beach along the Heath estate. Lots of holes in the sand, said Nancy. Do you suppose? The old clam digger set to work with a will. As Nancy watched, he brought up shell after shell from beneath the wet surface. Whelks, he exclaimed excitedly, and die in 'em too. Nancy wanted to dance for joy, but she controlled herself until me Hardy had dug up several dozen of the mollusks. You hit it, Miss Nancy, he cried. No doubt of it now, he grinned happily. The place is full of whelks. Nancy felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Now Floriana could have an income. She could keep Heath Castle and fix it up. There's one more thing I must do, the girl thought as she and me Hardy returned to River Heights. Talk to Cobb and Biggs. Nancy drove directly to the jail and asked to speak first to Biggs. Since this was his initial offense, she decided he would be more likely to answer her questions truthfully than the former convict. She told the ex-chauffeur of her recent discovery and asked him if he had found any notations with the bottles of dye. When he demurred about answering, the girl suggested that his sentence might be lightened. Oh my gosh, she is so, what is the word, precocious when she thinks she rules the law. That's funny. Okay. Or she's just being a master rhetorician and manipulating him. When he demurred about answering, the girl suggested that his sentence might be lightened if he told her everything he knew. Oh, she's probably actually maybe she's trying to find something that will reveal that he didn't do something as bad. Okay, well, we're going to find out. All right, I'll tell you, he said grudgingly. I got nothing to lose. The prisoner revealed that certain notes had been attached to each bottle of dye. Cobb Hooker had thought them of no value, but Biggs had hidden them under a certain flagstone in the cloister walk. Nancy, overjoyed, hastened homeward to tell her father the good news. He looked at her fondly, and how proud he was of her. Nancy, my dear, you saved the day for Floriana and the others, he said, smiling. Then he added, I'll see what I can do for Biggs. This is so, it's also wrong. It shouldn't be a system where someone can just pull some strings if they decide. Okay. But it is good to show mercy, so in that sense, it's good. There were weeks of uncertainty before the dye project was put into effect. Mr. Drew advanced money to restore the button factory, part of which was to be used as a laboratory. Me Hardy was placed in charge of beach operations, and a young chemist, using the notations left by Walter Heath, gradually worked out several lovely colors from the dye found in the whelks. During the waiting period, Nancy kept on wondering whether Walter Heath might not have made other discoveries. One idea which plagued her was that he had placed the Cinderella footprint in that particular spot. At last, a solution came to her. The water in the fountain. It gave George and Bess and me a tremendous lift, she thought excitedly. Maybe it has special value. Again, Nancy Drew had guessed correctly. An analysis of the water proved it to have unusually beneficial qualities, even curative effects in bone disorders. Oh my God. Arrangements were made with a bottling concern to market it. Presently, with money pouring in from two sources, Floriana was given a free hand to establish the gardens at Heath Castle, just as they had been during her romance with its former owner. Given a free hand? Okay, this sounds like something not good. They're referring to help. She was given free help. By who? And is this like a form of slavery? The disabled woman moved to the estate, taking Mrs. Fenimore and Joan with her. For weeks she planned and supervised. Then came a wonderful day when she was able to fill the gardens with disabled children, now laughing and happy. One afternoon, upon invitation, Nancy, Bess, and George, Mr. Drew, and Lieutenant Masters journeyed to the estate to view the many changes. It's kind of like one of those HGTV shows where they fix up the place and then they come back later to see how it's doing. The great gate stood open. The visitors drove up a winding road between avenues of trimmed hedge and trees. The three girls smiled when they recalled how different everything had seemed to them on their former visits there. It doesn't make me feel a bit creepy now, laughed Bess. Those burning eyes that watched me from behind the evergreen, Nancy chuckled. I know that they were Cobb hookers. With him in jail, what's to become of Mrs. Hooker and Jetty? Asked George. She's gone to work, replied the policewoman. Jetty has been sent to a special school because only last week he was caught trying to snatch a purse. By the way, he was wearing his father's clothes. Just like the time when he ran off with my pocketbook and the pearl from old Me Hardy's clam, Nancy said. It certainly was clever of you, Lieutenant Masters, to have solved that mystery and recovered the pearl for Nancy, said George. The visitors got out of the car near the restored loggia, not sure what I'm saying there, and paused to admire the repairs which had been made to the crumbling walls. The gardens were a mass of bloom. The lawn in front of the castle was velvety smooth and free from weeds. How did Floriana ever accomplish so much in such a short time, Nancy marveled, with the help of her free hand. Several pigeons alighted nearby. One of them, startled, flew to the parapet of the far tower of Heath Castle and began to coo. George smiled and whispered to Nancy, You were right. The sounds we heard the first day we came here were only pigeons cooing. I guess I let my imagination run with me when I was locked in the tower, laughed Nancy. At that time, their cooing sounded human. Bess called the girls' attention to the children who had come out on the lawn to play. A few of them were in wheelchairs, but they pushed them about with amazing skill. Floriana is doing remarkable work with these youngsters, said Lieutenant Masters. She's putting new spirit into them. Joan is developing into a fine little girl, too. She's proving to be a great help to her aunt. Oh, maybe that's the free hand. No. What is she doing? Asked Bess. Floriana is giving exercises to the children to restore nimbleness to their bodies. Joan does the demonstrating, and incidentally, Joan is the delight of her aunt. She's going to be a wonderful dancer someday. And take up where Floriana left off, said Bess dreamily. The callers were greeted cordially by the mistress of Heath Castle and her sister, almost restored to perfect health and looking very attractive, with a fashionable new coiffure. Tea was served on the terrace. Afterwards, Floriana invited her guests to the Poet's Nook, there to see children who were lined up at the drinking fountain. The water is helping to build strong bodies, she said proudly. Oh, it means so much to me to bring these boys and girls here. I'd never have forgiven myself if I had returned to a lonely life at Clover Farm. Mr. Drew had been waiting for this very moment. Taking a tiny box from his pocket, he slipped it into Floriana's hand. A little surprise, he explained. The woman slowly raised the lid. Nestled in the purple velvet was a ring set with a huge pearl. Not the one Walt meant for me. Oh, it's Floriana. She's got to see the pearl. Not the one Walt meant for me, Floriana asked, dazed. Yes. But how did you recover it? I thought Hector Keep had found the ring and sold it. Dad was able to trace it, Nancy spoke up. Mr. Keep failed to notice the inscription and sighed. Tears filled Floriana's eyes as she read, To my Cinderella, I'll wear the ring always in memory. Oh, to my Cinderella. That's what she's reading inside the ring. I'll wear the ring always in memory of Walt, she whispered, her voice trembling. Oh, Nancy, my dear friend, and Mr. Drew, you've made me very, very happy. Nancy smiled. She was glad the mystery had been brought to a successful close. Now she could devote more time to a new one on which she was working. Already Nancy was calling it The Mystery of the Tolling Bell. Her gaze wandered along the stately cloister of Heath Castle. With the afternoon sun sinking low, the shadows in the passageway had never looked more beautiful. Don't thank me for helping you, Floriana, Nancy said earnestly, taking her hand. Thank these crumbling walls. They provided the clue that brought you here, and forever they'll remain a symbol of mystery and romance. The end. Okay. I've read this is my first time reading a Nancy Drew book. So, okay, that was it. Carolyn Keene. It was fun to read. Thanks for listening along.